In this overview, we'll discuss how mezcal is made. You start with an agave plant, but how do you get from here to this delicious agave spirit? This process is a cycle that I like to break down in 6 steps. First, you have the harvest, then you have to cook the agave, then you have to mill the agave, then you have the fermentation, the distillation, and finally you have to replant the agave. We'll go over each of these right now. An agave plant is mature when a long stalk called a quiote sprouts up from the center of the plant called the piña. Let's check it out. Here's the piña, which translated from Spanish means pineapple. As you can see, the piña is protected by all these sword-like leaves called pencas. This is the quiote, and it will normally continue to grow to its peak where it will flower and reproduce. But for making mezcal, the quiote is cut off shortly after it begins to grow, right above the piña. By doing so, the agave continues to produce starchy carbohydrates, which now build up and are stored in the piña. This vastly increases the eventual sugar content needed to make the mezcal. Then, tough as nails workers step in to remove the pencas, usually with a machete. The piña is exposed, uprooted, and then taken to the distillery where the agave is processed further. This is an extremely tough job. Some piñas weigh hundreds of pounds. Over 90% of mezcal produced is in the Mexican state of Oaxaca in a distillery, or otherwise known locally as a palenque. This is where the mezcal is made. Northern states such as Michoacan and Durango call a distillery a viñada. This is where you'll find an horno, an underground oven where the agave is cooked. In this pit, wood is placed underneath volcanic rocks. The wood is burned for several hours until there are nice embers. This heat is transferred to the rocks and much of the smoke will have dissipated by then. The piñas are distributed evenly over the rocks. You want to fill in any spot where the heat may escape. Then the horno is covered with a tarp, then topped up with dirt. This insulates the horno and the agave cooks for several days. Again, very labor-intensive work happening here. This cooking stage is crucial to convert the bitter starches in the piña into sugars for the eventual fermentation. And let me tell you, there is nothing like biting into fresh, roasted agave. This natural sweetness is next level. Next, you have to mill the agave because these roasted piñas are too large to be fermented. And there are several methods to break down the agave. There's the tahona, a huge limestone wheel often pulled by horse. They can also be chopped up or mashed using machetes or mallets. And some operations use shredding machines to get the job done. Fermentation is now needed for the sugars to become alcohol. Yeast and bacteria are required for this conversion. Many great mezcaleros or mezcaleras, these are the guys or gals in charge of making the mezcal, use naturally occurring airborne yeasts to drive the fermentation. The milled agave mash can be fermented in wooden vats or tubs. Other operations use stainless steel containers. I've even seen cowhide skins being used. It's amazing. A fermentation is usually in the span of a week or two, but the end goal is to have sufficient alcohol content for the distillation. Which brings us now to distillation. The fermented liquid is called tepache and is roughly 6 to 8% alcohol by volume, or ABV. This is the equivalent alcohol percentage of a strong beer. Commercial mezcal is in the range of 40 to 55% ABV, so this tepache must be distilled to increase the alcohol concentration. In this schematic, the tepache is placed in a container or a pot above a heat source, in this case, a wood fire. The lighter ends begin to flash off into a vapor and go into an upper pipe. The piping continues into the second section where there is a water bath on the outside of the coils. The vapors cool and condense inside the coils back into a liquid. This is collected, shown here as an agave distillate. The distillation method used is usually indicative of the type of mezcal production. Industrial processes typically use huge stainless steel stills as they're making very large batches. Artisanal production used copper stills like seen before in the schematic. The fire boils off the alcohol in the first section and it condenses in the copper tube as it passes through a water bath in the second section. Clay pots can also be used to distill mezcal. This is in the ancestral mezcal production category. In any of these processes, the lighter ends boil off first. Then the mezcalero or mezcalera collect and separate these cuts into the puntas, which have the highest ABV. Then there's the body, the sweet spot that have the best flavors. And then last, the colas, which is the bitter back end of the distillation. An incredibly cool way to determine the various cuts is to look at the pearls or las perlas. A mezcalero or mezcalera can determine the ABV by analyzing the size of the pearls and how fast these bubbles dissipate back into liquid. Combining a certain proportion of these cuts, the puntas, the body, and the colas, into a final batch with a fixed ABV is the true measure of their skill. This is how their end product that they've spent weeks making, beginning with the harvest, all pieces together. And finally, replanting. This last step is a crucial component to the mezcal cycle. It takes an agave years to reach maturity, for some decades. Espadín or agave angustifolia is relatively short, but still takes 6 to 8 years until it's mature and the quiote rises. For this agave cuprietta to reach maturity, it takes up to 15 years. Then this species, agave americana, it can be 20 years or more before it can be harvested. Most palenques or viñedas I visited have this forward planning mindset. Here is an agave nursery in Michoacán. And back in Oaxaca, Espadín agave are being planted in the fields. Mezcal demand continues to grow, so this sustainability measure is crucial for the industry to survive long term. So that's how mezcal is made. But again, this is only an overview. Many of these steps, say the fermentation or the distillation, they're a science in themselves. I appreciate you tuning in. If you're getting value out of these mezcal-based videos, like or subscribe. It helps grow the channel. But again, thanks. See you soon.